microsegmentation. It's still being defined, no pun intended, but they can't even agree upon the way it's spelled. You'll see microsegmentation as one word. You'll see it spelled with a hyphen, as I use here. And you'll see different flavors of microsegmentation. So there's this race in the community right now because Gartner has already said that is the way of the future in terms of network security. So everyone readily, you guys can understand this, everyone is racing tonight. It's kind of like a land grab. They want to own this market share. But I talk about microsegmentation with software-defined networking, some encryption, fine-grained and tuned policy controls that are pushed as far down into the stack as possible. And I'm talking literally down to the IP packet level itself. And I also add a little bit of cloaking and dark endpoints, which will become important later on in the brief. And then critical infrastructure, I'm not going to bore you on that. You can look that up. PDD or PDD 63, and then that was superseded by Homeland Security when that became a thing. When we got the Homeland Security Department stood up after 9/11. But Policy 7, right, which came out in 2003, right? So you can go in and look at that. But really, all those things do is they define what is critical infrastructure, and I put some blurbs in there for you. But really, if we go to the next slide, what it does is it spells out and identifies the actual sectors. Now, what's important about this slide? Can anybody tell me what's important about that slide? And Brad, let me know if a hand goes up. Nothing?
Nope.
Okay, so here's why this slide is important. If you Google anything inside of critical infrastructure, you're going to see typically silos and bins. But if you truly understand the way the network works, that's what critical infrastructure looks like. They're interconnected. So when we look at, for example, the top one, the energy sector, people look at the energy sector. They focus on the energy sector, and rightfully so, right? You want to be an SME in your world. But typically what tends to happen, which makes people like me in my old line of work happy, is that they become very, let's just say they put horse blinders on and all they worry about is the energy sector. But I can build a pathway to feed, and I can do the old Bombi, this old cyber house, and I can build actual infrastructure and connective tissue to get to my target by using that interconnectedness, right? So it's almost a different way that we have to look and approach the problem set, right? So the critical infrastructure problem set writ large is really one of an interconnected world, and that extrapolates out into this world of IoT, right? So for you guys that are certified ethical hackers, it's really understanding that the problem set, the perimeter, right? It really is a big problem, and so the conversation has to be one of how can you not prevent the attack, but really how do you mitigate and reduce the threat? Because I'm going to tell you, if you're worrying about the energy sector, if you're worrying about your pipeline, if you're worrying about your factory floor, if you're worrying about your, whatever, the adversary will find a way in, right? That's the conversation you need to go into this problem with. The adversary will find a way in. The issue you have is how do you reduce and mitigate the threat, much like the human body does with a common cold, right? We don't just shut down because we get a cold. We isolate it, and then the rest of the body continues, the vital organs continue to function, and then what happens is we learn from what just happened once we've isolated it, and we inoculate the rest of the body, right? That's kind of the approach we want to have. Microsegmentation is a way to do it. I throw this one up here because it just kind of breaks out a little better thing of what those areas are. And this is also tied into something called InfraGard, which is an FBI effort that I belong to. So InfraGard is a way, it's under the auspices of the FBI to bring in subject matter experts to kind of work in critical infrastructure protection. So really, when I look at this problem set, I look at all these things, and when you look at critical infrastructure protection, you look at this slide, you really become aware of the fact that critical infrastructure protection is really everything. It's everything we do, right? Government facilities, water, commercial facilities, financial services. I mean, everything we do is tied into this world, so it is our problem, right? So how do we fix it? ISO 99, right? If you're not familiar with ISO 99, it's a governing body that deals with ICS, industrial control systems, operational technology, SCADA, all that whole world. But it really spells out 3 ways to go against the problem, right? The threat vector. And when I say the threat vectors, I'm talking about the fact that 5 years ago, it was very hard and very costly for an attacker to gain entry into a system. Nowadays, because of the proliferation of tools, the understanding of the way the network works, and if you read the Washington Post, the very exquisite and very powerful, very tuned and tailored tool sets that were developed when I was in the uniform at the cost of I'll just say millions of dollars and thousands of man hours to develop these exploitation tools. They're now readily available for reverse engineering and reapplication. And the problem is these things are being applied without the understanding that was built into them by the people, right? These were purpose-built tools to do a very specific thing. Now we have folks that are just throwing them against things, right? And so it becomes a very swirly, witch's brew problem set out there. But traditionally, the way we prevent things like that from getting inside the network and then propagating across the network is air gaps. But I will tell you, air gaps fail. They do work. An adversary today has various ways to get across an air gap, right? Whether it's RF spectrum or it's these other, idioms, right? The pathway to defeat can be such and built in such a way to kind of bridge that gap, right? There's just a way. The only thing that you can change is how much time you give the attacker and how much you make him work to get inside that network, right? So that's really the conversation. The more time he needs, the more he has to work. That means you're causing him to raise his signature, you're causing him to expend a lot of money, and really at the end of the day, we just want to make it hard enough so he goes to somebody else, right? And that's kind of, I hate to say it like that, but at the end of the day, if we can just get the guy, the burglar, to focus on the house next door as opposed to our door, right? I lock my door, but if somebody wants to break my window, they're going to get in the house. But if I lock my door, chances are he's just going to jiggle it, see that it's locked. He's going to go to the house that's on ours. So, air gap is one way. VLANs, we got a little bit sexier. We started coming out with the virtual LAN networks. That kind of cool. But ISO 99 is saying that with the proliferation and the exposure and the presentation of the infrastructure to the internet, the exposure of your infrastructure, if you will, the attack surface, right? You are going to start to break down air gap and VLANs in a very important way. Security does not exist for security's sake. Security exists to support a business model, and if security becomes too expensive, you're just not going to do it. And so what's happening is you are very quickly going to run out of money and resources to apply air gaps and VLANs, traditional hardware solutions for security, across an ever-expanding attack surface, right? So the challenge is, what can we do to change that conversation?
Okay.
The way we do it is, yeah, wait.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Just a question here.
How is microsegmentation different from VLANs and air gap?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So we're going to jump right into that right now. So if I understood you correctly, you kind of looked up a little bit. How is microsegmentation different than VLANs and air gaps? Did I hear that correctly?
That's what he said.
Great, perfect. So we're going to jump into that right now. So that's a good segue. So, I'll tell you right now, let me just answer that question before I push on to make sure I answer it specifically. So in a traditional air gap, what I do is, and let's be honest, right, if you look at Forrester Research, Gartner, or any of the leading thought thinkers out there in terms of security, they will tell you that there's really three things on the continuum when we're talking about segmentation, right? There's plain old segmentation. There's over-segmentation, which is a security worst practice, right? But then there's microsegmentation. So when I talk about microsegmentation, I am talking about taking the security policy that we would normally take and apply to, say, a firewall solution, a hardware solution, or a software solution in a VLAN, right, where we do either logical or physical separation. I'm talking about pushing that security policy all the way down to the individual IP packet itself. Now, I'm going to pause it there because I know that sounds kind of crazy, but if you think about it, it's kind of like Wolverine and Weapon X, and I'm going to get to that here in a second, so let me jump right into this here. The problem that you guys have, or that we have as a community, is that when we talk about critical infrastructure, we talk about some of this stuff, it's always got to be on, it's never going to fail, it's all these things that we have. A lot of times, the patching issue becomes an issue. Why, right? I'll give you an example. In Equifax, right, or not Equifax, in a lot of systems, they will not patch, not because they don't want to patch, they want to patch, but number one, they can't see the equipment, right? They don't know that it's there. You've got shadow IT. But another issue is a lot of times they don't want to patch because they're afraid that the actual patch itself, while increasing the security, may actually shut down the system, right? It will hazard the system, right? So there's this reticence to actually apply a patch enterprise-wide because it will probably shut down some things, right? So in the world of critical infrastructure, where things always have to be on with 100% uptime, that becomes a challenging thing to do. So let's keep pushing on here and save time. Trust me, I'm going to answer your question here as we get down. when we look at security, can anybody tell me what the purpose of that moat is, right? Everybody always sees this castle theme, right, when we talk about network security, because the
It's a
castle
water gate.
represents the perimeter.
That's Watergate.
You know, we protect stuff. But what's the moat supposed to do?
Force all traffic to the,
Yeah.
To the bridge.
No limits to the bridge.
Force all traffic to the bridge.
Yep, yeah, exactly. So inside the castle, we like to think of that as, inside the data center, and I've got my zones, right? So to answer the gentleman's question, right, each one of those little buildings inside there, that would be either an air gap or that would be, segmentation through VLANs, right? I put things into different trust zones, and I've got that all set up. But typically, everything in that castle is trusted, right? That's my east-west traffic, right? I have trusted traffic in there. The moat surrounds it to prevent anything from coming in around it, so I can define my bound, or I can bound my perimeter, and I force my north-south traffic into one area where I can put my IDS, right? So I've got, we're trying. The original point, though, of the moat, they put water in there for a particular reason. And if we look over on the left-hand side, you'll see I put the OSI model there, and of course, as a joke, I put 8 there because 8, the people layer is always the problem, all the way down to the NIC. But can anybody tell me why water is in the moat? Why did they use water?
So you can put alligators in there.
Exactly. Yeah. So from an exploitation perspective, this is always a very interesting concept to me. In the old days, if I could attack your castle and take over the castle with a siege, I would actually just surround the castle, put up a camp, and I would camp out there for 30 days, a month, 2 months, 2 years, 5 years. I would basically siege you, right? Because I can't get inside, so I'm just going to siege you, right? So that's what we would do today with the denial of service attack. But back then, they would put a siege camp around there. They can't get inside, but yet they are now preventing you from doing anything outside that network. But while I'm sieging you, I would have my engineers start digging tunnels underneath your defenses and come up inside the castle. The point of the water was so that it would flood any attempt to try and tunnel into the castle. That's why you see water in a moat. That's the whole point of the water. It's the same thing in network exploitation. I'm going to come at you at the least common denominator, the easiest way to do it. I'm going to come at you on layer 8 with my phishing and spear phishing and social engineering. And if that fails, I'm going to keep driving down 7, 6. I'm going to come all the way down until if I can't get you down there, I am simply going to do supply chain interdiction, and I'm going to put a hardware implant on something in a factory and let it go into your company, and I'm going to compromise you. But the point is that tunneling is still relevant today, right? And so with that notion, again, going back to this notion of if the adversary has enough time, enough interest, enough money, they're going to get in. So what you want to do is you want to get away from this defining perimeter where, it's hard on the outside, soft on the inside. And I want to make it so that every time you take a bite of my network, it's always hard, right? So this is that concept of microsegmentation. I don't want you to be able to compromise a hardware solution or a VLAN and then have free reign inside everything the VLAN controls or everything that the firewall controls, right? If you read the Washington Post, there's exploits out there at the hardware level on Cisco routers, and a lot of people use Cisco routers as their applied solution for firewalls, right? But everything that firewall then controls is free game, right? I want to prevent that. So to answer your question about microsegmentation, I want to ensure that literally every IP packet, every workload, every comm channel is hard, right? That's kind of the conversation I want to move this to. Now, what I'm talking about actually exists, right? It's actually being applied by companies, right? It's not just a Unisys solution. Companies like Cisco, there are folks that are working in this space right now. But if you look over on this line,
Jen,
yellow. Yeah, go ahead.
a follow-up question here.
You had mentioned earlier that there's a concern about over-segmentation, but what you're talking about is extreme segmentation, right? Because you're getting really down to the bit level almost, right?
Yes. Yeah, so that's a great point, right? So this is why I hate giving these talks with only 1 hour, because first of all, I love to be in person, because these are those sidebar conversations that are really interesting to me. So there are, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but in the sake of time, we're halfway there, and I've got about 15 minutes, but let me answer you real quick. You're exactly right. There's a danger when you do microsegmentation. It has to be done and applied correctly. And so, going back to my earlier slide, it begins with seeing network. You have to, the first step to microsegmentation, you have to be able to know what exactly your network looks like. That's point 1. Point 2, I have to understand what is talking to what. right? Once I understand those two things, I can then begin by hardening a network around, say, for example, my crown jewels. And I can begin to then micro-segment those critical pieces of infrastructure, right? But what I'm trying to say is I'm giving you an extreme example to show you the power of this. If you do micro-segmentation correctly with the right amount of understanding, you literally negate the need for a firewall. Because think about it, why did we create firewalls to begin with, right? To control traffic, right? And prevent, exposure and all these other things. But at the end of the day, done correctly, microsegmentation is powerful. Done incorrectly, microsegmentation could be a burden, right? So there's a conversation that has to be had there. You're exactly right.
This question.
But
Jack,
go ahead.
Jack, another question.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
A quick question, and when you have an SDN, most of the companies are moving to SDN, you have all the application policies, all the controls and all defined over there, right? So how is that, or does it go in conjunction with microsegmentation? Because it looks like what you're telling is exactly what we do in SDN. Or perhaps I'm missing something.
So, Brad, I kind of got garbled. Can you kind of tell me what was just said?
He says the policy set in a
Yeah, the
software-defined
policy
network.
automation and governance that we set up in SDN, doesn't it fall in line with how we do, like based on what you're talking about, microsegmentation, we do those kind of things already in SDN. So
Yeah, the question is, we do this already inside the SDN, inside the policies within the SDN,
right.
or not?
Yeah, so we do, right? So most do, and I'm going to tell you, one of the things that I want to talk about, actually, you know what, let's just handle it right here. When a lot of guys girls go to the board, say, I need money, I want to apply a solution across the security spectrum and do this, right? So they're going to get a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, they're going to get resources, they're going to spend that money. In a lot of cases, they're going to spend that money to buy certain solutions, whether they're VLAN solutions or hardware solutions, doesn't matter. Physical, logical, doesn't matter, but they're going to buy from a particular vendor. What they're going to get is, say, for example, a Palo Alto solution, a Cisco solution, doesn't matter, but they're going to get a solution from a vendor. The issue is, it then kind of puts you in the mode of you have to then apply further solutions as you learn more and more about the threat environment, or as the company wants to go in a different direction. You're kind of beholden to building infrastructure so that things can play well and talk to each other. What I'm talking about with the microsegmentation that I'm talking about using is agnostic to the platform. It's agnostic to the current applications. It literally lays on top, and I have some slides that talk about that here in a second. Let me try and get to those real quick for the sake of time.
Yeah.
That's a good point, though. So let me just
We'll come
burn
back
through
and
here.
revisit it.
You guys already know this. We don't need to know anything. Nothing here. Nothing here, because I think I got about 10 more minutes here, right, Brad?
About 10 minutes. We'll
Yeah,
check
so
back
I'll
in
run
at
through
10
real
minutes.
quick. All right, so here's the thing right now, right? So we're looking at 44%, but the U.S. government put controllers on the network so they could understand this year what the network looked like in terms of what devices were on there. They figured they would have maybe 5, 10, 15, maybe 20% more things on their shadow IT. The number that came back was 44%. They have 44% more things out there than what they really used to have. So think about that attack surface. That's all unknown space that the adversary can move around on, right? And I'm going to try and burn through real quick to get to what the gentleman was talking about. So let's keep going here. And this is good stuff here, but let's go. Okay, I'm burning through here at the sake of time. Again, we'd love to have a conversation about this, but when we talk about microsegmentation, there's 4 models right now. This is going to talk to the gentleman, the question you just brought up. 4 models, right? This is not Jack talking. I just literally stole this from Gartner, right? So Gartner came out with this a couple of months ago, and based on their purview of the entire commercial sector, they understand that there are a native cloud control model, there's third-party firewall model, there's the hybrid model, and the overlay. And I'm going to show you what each one looks like. So native clouds, nothing sexy here. The native cloud model of microsegmentation. Notice that I use one word, microsegmentation, because that's how Gartner uses it. This is your Amazon cloud. This is your Google cloud. This is your Azure cloud. This is your Amazon AWS cloud, right? So this is basically you're joining their cloud instance and you're taking all the security that
But
they
you
have.
could put a WAF on each of them and
This is the combination of the hypervisor and all that other good stuff like that. The next model, this is third-party firewalls, right? So this kind of is talking about what the gentleman was talking about here. This is companies like Palo Alto, Cisco. They have a a VLAN's solution, they've got an application, right? But you're protecting it with a software solution. The next one is the hybrid model, takes a little bit of both of those, right? But to get to what I was talking about, this is the model that I'm very interested in, right? This is the hybrid model where I take the software-defined networking solution, I overlay it on whatever infrastructure is already in place. So if you're using the security policies, and again, to kind of get back to what he was saying with this question, when you look at the overhead complexity and just the cost to manage, an enterprise-wide deployment of various vendors, right? That cost is very expensive. And it induces a lot of vulnerabilities because every time you're mixing and matching different solutions, right? It's kind of like you're building the Kluge-Frankenstein thing, right? It becomes a rich space for an adversary to move around it because it goes back to that being able to see, right? Not only do your things have to play well together and integrate well together, but I have to be able to see across all of that surface area and be able to touch all those things so that I can do patch maintenance and all that other kind of good stuff. Right? That becomes a challenge. So I want to reduce that. So what I want to do here is I want to show you what that would look like in the amount of time we got left. Again, I apologize because I'm trying to burn through a very lengthy presentation in less than an hour. But what I want to do is I want to virtualize anything. If it's talking with TCP/IP, I want to isolate it and I want to virtualize it, right? So nothing sexy there, right? But I'm going to add another requirement on there. I want to understand all of the endpoints, and I don't want to care if they are located in building X or over on this campus. It doesn't matter. It's associated to the actual workload, right? So whether it's a person or it's a thing, it's a server, it's an application, it doesn't matter. I want to understand if it's talking, and then I want to be able to lock down that communication channel, right? So that's really when I talked earlier about microsegmentation. Yes, we could we could literally over segment, right? We could go all the way down to where I have every packet that's moving around there segmented. That's probably not realistic right now. What we're really looking at doing is isolating particular user groups or communities of interest, and then basically building hyper-secure virtual tunnels between those endpoints. And then what we're going to do here, keep going, we'll build this. I'm then going to apply cryptology to this, right? So this goes above and beyond a normal IPsec tunnel, which everybody's using. But again, if you think about the analogy there, right? IPsec has been around since '93. Nobody really used it back then because nobody, one, needed to use it. Two, it was seen as hard and difficult to work with. But nowadays, everybody uses it, right? I'd like to take that a little bit further and apply the AES 256 standard to it, right? And a couple of other things here on the end, right? So we do a little Dillman there with the elliptical curve. But the point is, I'm wrapping that tunnel in 256, and then I'm going to do a little bit more with it. Notice there that the policies are applied based on the user server's role in an organization, not by the device, the VLAN switch or port. So now think about that. So going back to the comment about what we are currently doing today. Yeah, we're currently doing something similar to this today, but now I want to be able to have my policies applied based on the user's role in the organization, right? And so think about that. It makes it very easy from a complexity and management perspective to kind of add folks and take folks off. At the end of the day, if you're already using some type of, identity solution, whether it's Microsoft Active Directory, LDAP, or if you're DoD and you're using the CAC card, this would work with that. And then at the end of the day, the communities of interest are now dark. So what do we mean by that? I want to be able, and we didn't talk about this, but you saw some of the earlier slides about the cyber kill chain, about how, and I would have talked to you about how the adversary would get into your network. I want to prevent two things. I want to prevent the adversary from seeing the network. So when I'm doing my initial scanning and reconnaissance, if I'm shooting TCP/IP packets at you and I'm trying to do network scanning and enumeration, those endpoints are going to just simply drop. They're not going to respond to the packet. They're going to drop the TCP/IP packet because it's not recognized as part of the community of interest. Once that happens, you can't see me. If you can't see me, you can't transition into weaponization and trying to apply scripts and things to kind of gain access. More importantly, if I compromise you on layer 8, the human layer of the OSI model, and I spearfish you and get you to click on something, when you click on it, that exploit, whatever I do, that executable is actually contained within the community of interest. So now I am not able to do a couple of things. I'm not able to enumerate from inside that community of interest. I'm not able to exfil data from that community of interest. And I'm not, more importantly, able to then cross-pollinate, propagate, and escalate, try and gain higher and higher privileges, basically mapping and moving around what used to be, lateral movement, east-west traffic, pivot points, right? I contain the threat. And then the harder that thing has to work, the more signature it's going to make, and it sets it up for my, normal, IDS, IPS sensors for pickup and stuff. At the end of the day, we're going to reduce the attack surface and we're going to reduce the audit surface. Those are two different things, but those are two very important things, right? So security, I want to reduce my attack surface, but then on my audit surface, just like what happened with Equifax, the PII and the things that are like social security numbers, they shouldn't be readily available on the same plumbing infrastructure that we currently have, right? They're probably going to ride there, but somehow I have to separate those. And as the gentleman said before, we're currently doing that right now with VLANs and switches and some other hardware type solutions, but yet we're still getting compromised, right? You're still able, the adversary is still able to exploit a known patch vulnerability, and then from there they will escalate, move around inside the network and gain access to, 146 million, it's just mind-boggling the amount of data that was filled out without anybody knowing it over a period of 75 days, right? So that tells me that the current solution fails, right? It does not work. It does not hold up to the current threat environment, right? To me, the microsegmentation piece, while the adversary may have gained actual entrance into the network, the threat itself would have been contained and managed, right? You wouldn't have had the catastrophic failure. And now I'm looking at my watch because I think I just hit my time mark, and I apologize.
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I tell you what, I'm going to shut up now at that point and turn 5 minutes over to you guys. I can go on for hours on this stuff, but I want to give you guys time to kind of ask me questions.
Okay, if you could flip back to slide 28.
Yeah?
Where is he?
He just went.
Yeah, okay, never mind, go to slide 30.
Those wrong guys.
We'll come back to 28.
He can be where he was at.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, this is good. This is my question. This is for me? or-
It is your question, yes.
That's good.
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have
Yeah.
specified.
I'm sorry. This is Ram. I was next to this talk. I was supposed to talk about NSX. So I think I want the folks to understand the subtle differences between what you're doing and how it is in NSX. I mean, there's the way I look at it is you operate more like a CASB, like a big class or Sky High or Cipher Cloud kind of people who you're trying to go to the endpoint and all the way to the data center with the encryption and with the intermediation. Does your, I have 3 questions, right? First, does your solution have an agent that goes into the endpoint or the server or both? Does your solution has gateways? Or is your solution based on this idea of embedding inside the hypervisor like NSX? So, and I'll take it back.
Jack, let me offer one thing. D-Raj was concerned about networks where we couldn't put an agent on the systems, and we have something called a virtual gateway. I wanted to offer that as a sidebar. First, go ahead, Jack.
Sure. No, so D-Raj, you bring up a great
No,
point,
it's not.
D-Raj,
It's
right?
not.
So-
It's not D-Raj. D-Raj was who I was working with in American Airlines on the segmentation project.
Oh, okay.
Who's
All right,
gone
so-
silent, by the way.
Yeah, but the question it's a great question, right? So right now the answer is, and I hate to kind of solution this over the phone with you right now because I like to be agnostic, but in the case of Unisys, the way our solution would be employed and then or deployed and then employed is, one, we have a ability to get in there with a product to see the network and get about 80% of what the network is. If it's talking, if it's on and it's talking, we will see it. All right. So that's point one. Once we see it, we then deploy a very lightweight agent, a shim, if you will, that sits between layer 2 and layer 3 of the OSI model. And we do that because we do not want to impact any of the current infrastructure, and we want it to be able to work across all spectrum of infrastructure and OS, right? So I don't care if you're using Linux, I don't care if you're using Windows, I don't care if you're using AIX, our solution will work because the agent sits low enough the stack that it works down there. And then once the agent is deployed, it can sit either active or silent on the wire in a passive mode. And the reason we do that is, to be quite honest with you, we screwed up. When we first did it, we put that thing out there hot, and when we didn't understand what the network looked like and turned it on, it basically failed closed, which is a great security policy, but not good for business because literally we stopped traffic from talking. So what we do now is we go in, we see the network, and then in a conversation with the client, we then start to gradually, at a technical level, deploy the agents out there, and we put them out there passively. And then there's a little bit of heuristic modeling that goes on, and then we start turning things on, right? And then as we turn them on, it then starts to begin the conversation from segmentation to, at the end of the spectrum,